What is preventing this mass of people at the end of the film from wanting to save and redeem Arthur Fleck? And is it too late to redeem the Joker?
They're also angry. We see them protesting against people like Thomas Wayne. And so I feel like they want a little of what Arthur Fleck has. They want what we see in those last few scenes, that control and that power that he has.
Welcome to the Neutral Ground. In many ways, you can't think of Batman without eventually getting to his arch nemesis, the Joker. The Joker comes in many styles and forms, and has been portrayed by quite a few actors over the years, from Cesar Romero to Heath Ledger, and even Mark Hamill. That's right, Luke Skywalker himself, who voiced the Joker in many of the Warner Brothers animated universe movies and TV shows. But today, we're going to be talking about Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of the clown prince of crime from Todd Phillips' film, The Joker. Our guest this week is Liz Wayson. Liz was formerly an assistant professor of English and Writing Center director at Brenau University. She's currently a second year PhD student at the University of Georgia, studying rhetoric and composition and Writing Center studies. Her research areas include disability studies, spatial rhetorics, writing studies, and Black speculative fiction. Today, we're going to be discussing her article, Walking and Dancing in Gotham City: The Marginalized Flaneur, Mental Health Activism, and the Spectacle of Violence in Todd Phillips' Joker. It wouldn't be a conversation about the Joker without a little bit of chaos. You might hear a couple little robotic phrases here and there, but still, it's a fantastic conversation. Remember, if you want to support our efforts to bring back civilized discourse to the mainstream, make sure you subscribe/follow, leave a kind comment for me or my guests, and share the show with a friend. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Liz Wayson. Liz, welcome to the Neutral Ground. Now, Todd Phillips' Joker movie is one of those kind of films that every time I see it, I find something new that I want to discuss with someone. And so when I came upon your article entitled Walking and Dancing in Gotham City: The Marginalized Flaneur, Mental Health Activism, and the Spectacle of Violence in Todd Phillips' Joker, which was published in the South Atlantic Review, I knew that I wanted to have you on to talk about it. Before we get into the specifics of your study, I want to ask a preliminary question. So, mental health and cinema have somewhat always been intertwined. What was it about Phillips's Joker film that moved you enough to pursue this study?
Hi, Joseph. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I was really drawn to this character when I watched the film, and I think what compelled me to write the study was that I find Arthur Fleck uh, is a very complicated and complex character, and I think that's to me a really good way to describe mental illness and mental health. These are very complex and complicated ideas and situations and experiences. And I feel like his character is a great reflection of the complicated nature of it, of mental illness. So that's why I was really compelled to write about it. But I was also really drawn to the dances in the film and the movement, and that's kind of what really stuck with me after seeing the film and after leaving the theater. I was just those dances were just in the back of my mind the whole time because I was just trying to figure out what did they mean, like why are they important to his character, and also why did it make me feel so weird to watch it. um, so because I found them kind of like awkward and displaced a little bit. So I wanted to kind of investigate that a little bit more, like these improvised movements and what they might have to say about the experiences of people with mental illness or people like Arthur Fleck. So yeah, that's kind of what drew me to it.
You know what I love about that is I just had this conversation with my students in the first day. We talked about writing not just simply as a form of production, but writing is in many ways the highest form of thinking because you have to connect. You have to work through every word has to connect with the previous one, every sentence, every paragraph. And so the beautiful thing about writing and why it's so powerful, why we've been writing journals and diaries and all of these different things for so long, is that it helps kind of put order on the chaos that's in our minds. And so I love the fact that your reaction after you watched the film was kind of like, I have to figure this out. I've got to write. I've got to write and
Yeah,
figure this out. That's awesome.
yeah, it's like my dance, you know? Yeah, yeah, um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's get into this character here a little bit. The specifically, you introduce in the article the flaneur as a type of protesting figure, right? But can you tell us a little bit more about what that character is and how it connects with the Joker?
Yeah, the traditional flaneur, which is kind of, the inspiration for this, um, is, well, flaneur is a term coined by it's a French term, and it means, urban stroller, wanderer, idler. It's been theorized and written about for centuries, but I think it came about through Walter Benjamin's reading of Charles Baudelaire's The Painter of Modern Life in 19th century Paris, which was about like the arcades that were being built in Paris at the time and the beautiful romantic architecture of these like shopping malls. And the flaneur was someone who frequented these places and like strolled, idled there. He was like a man of privilege. He was a white upper class man. But the flaneur since then has taken many forms. And, he was in Edgar Allan Poe's Man of the Crowd. And in that novel, he's like, or in that short story novel, sorry, he's a little bit more dark, sinister. He's a detective warrior. So there've been many like interpretations of the flaneur, and most recently, we've seen some studies about the marginalized flaneur, which is what I think Arthur Fleck is. And in terms of him being a protest flaneur, I kind of got that idea from reading an article about the artist Vito Aconchi's some of his artwork that's in New York. And he's a he's an artist that he's a performance artist and does installation art. Or he was. He passed away recently. But he defined the activist flaneur as someone whose walks can activate or change the environment. And so I kind of saw that a connection there between that and Arthur Fleck's movements in the film and how his strolls throughout Gotham, specifically his dances, were kind of changing the environment. They were kind of disrupting it. And so I saw those movements as a protest. Maybe I don't know if I see him as an activist per se, but definitely protesting Gotham and all of the restrictions that have been placed on him and the lower class in that city. So that's kind of how I was approaching it.
It's interesting. I
Yeah.
can hear you kind of figuring out, okay, do I like the label of activist here for him or not? Does it really fit or not? And I can kind of understand where you're coming from there because it's almost like by the end of the film at least, kind of the activist label is kind of thrust upon him at least. His everything leading up to that moment at the end has really just been in some sense Arthur trying to figure out what's going on. Who am I now in the wake of, you know, all this new information that I'm taking in and even going over my own breaking point as well. Who am I? You know, everything gets essentially stripped away from him so much and so often of his humanity. It's almost as if you could understand how he just wouldn't, at a certain point, even know anymore. Well, then who am I as a human being?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I feel like, when I think of activism too, I think of like a social cause, like you're advocating for something. And I feel like I don't know if he's necessarily advocating for a collective, as much as he is like himself a little bit. But I see that protest as representative of anyone who is in his position, who feels neglected, misunderstood, like the city or the world community has given up on them. Yeah.
What makes your article, I think, different from others that I've read, actually, is that you're putting on display what I believe is a very genuine struggle, and you don't shy away from it, which I appreciate. And you can push back a little bit here. if you think I'm wrong, but I get a sense through your writing that there's this simultaneous wanting to praise Phillips for a strikingly harsh and at times all too honest depiction of how society can play a major role in exacerbating mental health concerns, which I think your average viewer probably picks up on for the most part. But hidden beneath that, of course, is still this problematic, stereotypical connection between mental illness and the perpetuation of violence. So, my question is, how did you work through this struggle and find some sense of resolution if you were able to at all?
Yeah, that was something I really did grapple with as I was writing the article. I read an interview where Todd Phillips says that he was wanting to make this movie to show what makes someone this way, like Joker. Like, how do you become Joker? How do you become this like psycho killer, basically? And I feel like it's complicated. Like that mental illness is complicated too. Trying to figure out what makes someone mentally ill, like that is a complicated process. So I mean, though I kind of like how he's trying to show how like our environment and um, society and culture can influence us and influence our behaviors and kind of create mental illness. I don't think it's that simple. And I also don't like the cause and effect relationship that's shown, like how if you become mentally ill, then you are prone to violence. I feel like that was kind of what really bothered me a lot with the film, seeing this cause and effect type of relationship. And I feel like we see that a lot sometimes in the news, and that kind of gives us a different portrayal of mental health or mental illness. With the mass shootings that we see occurring, I feel like it's kind of like putting a bad label and stigmatizing people that experience issues with mental health or mental illness. So, yeah.
I applaud that for the past, let's say, 5 to 7 years, maybe a little bit longer even, our culture wants to try to have more conversations about mental health. But I will just say this, um, if you struggle with a diagnosed mental illness, or you love someone and are supporting someone who's struggling with diagnosed mental illness, one of the difficult conversations, because it's very nuanced, that we just don't seem to want to have, is that there is a difference between mental health, the broad term, right? So, for example, we all have a mental health, all of us, and a diagnosed mental health condition. And the problem that I see today is, I don't know if it that we've become a little bit lazy as well in terms of our language, which is dangerous, quite honestly. But what I see is more and more people, unfortunately, who are millions of people with diagnosed mental health conditions who are in society, functioning jobs, marriages, all these different things. And I'm starting to see them having to kind of come out and push back a little bit just to say, listen, it's a little bit different to talk about, let's say, something like situational depression, which is real depression, and also the diagnosed kind of, let's say, bipolar schizophrenia, which have to be treated very differently. And so, one of the things that when I rewatched this again, this film recently for this conversation, I really keyed in on this idea of even just on the bus scene with the mother and the child, and trying to just look at it here. Okay, so we have a mental health situation in some sense going on, but then also we have a diagnosed mental health condition happening with Arthur as well when he starts laughing, right? And there is no real, other than his card, which he tries, to use. There's no real conversation that happens there between the two. And I'm finding that to be a very dangerous thing today.
Yeah. Um, like, yeah, the lack of communication about it. I do think that scene is a great representation of the divide because, especially with the way that the woman and the mother stares at him, like the gawking, and I feel like her stare kind of was representative of like the gaze of um, and again, language is important, right? So I don't know if I should say the gaze of the non-mentally ill or non-disabled, or but I guess, I mean, I feel like her gaze like just kind of condemned him to the other, like just seeing mental illness as something that is other, and not understanding it, or trying to understand it. Like kind of a complete dismissal was being shown, I think, with that glare that she gives him. Maybe even annoyance too. But yeah, I definitely see a disconnect, and maybe it is laziness in a way. I mean, I think these kind of terms and ideas and concepts are, they take a lot of work to like, it takes a lot to like research them and work through them, and know how to talk about them, using the right language. And that's another thing I grappled with too when I was writing this, because I saw Arthur Fleck as someone who is mentally ill, also someone with a disability, a laughing disability, um, possibly neurodivergent. So it's kind of like, how do I don't want to box him in, like I don't want to box him into one of these terms. Like, how do I talk about him and talk about people like him that are experiencing the same kind of things? It's a challenge, but it takes work,
It does.
try to
It
do. Yeah.
takes, in many ways, it takes quite a few uncomfortable conversations to have up front because ultimately you want to support anyone's mental health as best as you can. But when you're trying to support someone also who has a clearly defined or diagnosed mental health condition, you also have to have enough of a wide berth to help support them as well to move forward. So it's just one of those conversations that we just I appreciate how far we've come with it, but we still have quite a ways to go actually with that. So let me ask you this. You write Gotham City as almost an entity or a character, kind of in of itself. It's oppressive, it's suffocating, and as you argue, it actually changes the way its citizens even kind of stroll or walk its streets, which I loved when you dove into that. When you talk about movement in this essay, how exactly does Gotham City in the Joker alter things like movement and even body composition?
Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, I did see Gotham as a bit of its own kind of character, kind of monstrous in a way. I feel like it is a city that is built for people like Thomas Wayne, and built and constructed for the 1%. And then so I feel like, it being that it is a city that's kind of built for the 1%, I feel like it limits the way others, such as lower class marginalized citizens like Arthur, like it limits the way they move through it, through kind of like, I feel like it kind of segregates their movement in a way, because we see them confined to the mass transit system, to the buses, to walking a lot more than ride versus riding in cars, or and not just any car, but like a taxi or an Uber or something like that. Thomas Wayne would probably ride in because he's probably, I'm assuming, not driving himself. But so yeah, I just feel like it confines their movement by forcing them to navigate the city in certain ways based on their um, income status. And so I feel like it's like a controlling force in that way. And I guess that's my answer for that. That's as far as I was getting with that one.
No, that's
Yeah.
fine, and I think it's fascinating too, though, that the movie, perhaps in some sense, is saying you can try to control all of the ways that people stay in their lanes in the city, but the problem specifically with that urban setting is that invariably you're going to connect in some ways, right? And so if you ignore or try to ignore the fact that in those urban landscapes you have to be a part of the of a larger human kind of ecosystem. Matter of fact, for many people, that's the draw of the city, is that you have this large ecosystem of humanity that you can't escape even if you wanted to, and that kind of excites people. And so
Yeah.
when please go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, this is all, yeah, yeah, like that's what I'm seeing. Yeah, like you would think the city that people would be more interconnected there, but in that film, I feel like they're really not. That there is this huge divide. Um, I mean, I'm just repeating myself, really, but yeah, I just like yeah, like not everyone is traveling, not everyone's using the same routes or the same ways of transportation, and I feel like it's a big class issue. But yeah, like they're not all mingling. They're very segregated lives, I feel. Um,
Yeah, and
yeah,
invariably you're going to meet. And so the kind of city that you cultivate will ultimately play a role in your interactions in the end anyway. It's not as if it's like a suburban area where you really can isolate yourself from others, and where everybody in some sense is isolated in cars and things like that. You just can't help, even if you're Thomas Wayne, you can't help but have to interact with other people. And so even with his interactions in the film, they seem like the interactions of a man who hasn't had a lot of time with others, right? Like I remember even again watching the film again for this, the bathroom scene, and just it wasn't even just that he was standoffish. It just seemed almost a little bit like he was the one to me that felt more disconnected in the conversation than even Arthur.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, that scene is the one that I was remembering, where they do, connect and meet, and then also he tried to, come to his house. But yeah, he definitely seems like out of touch, I think, with the people of Gotham. Um, and that scene again was also really symbolic of the segregation of those two classes. You have the upper class who's in this fancy gala in this nice room with all very nice clothing, and then you have outside, in the clothing middle class, the signs of protesters, and just you just see that separation there. But then they come together, and then they're like Arthur Fleck and Thomas Wayne do in the bathroom, and there is just this huge disconnect. He does not understand what people like Arthur Fleck are going through. Yeah,
So we've alluded to it a couple of times. So let's get into this dancing a little bit here, right? You
yeah,
can't help but be drawn in by the expressive movements of Arthur. Let me quote you first, and then I'll ask you to kind of talk a little bit more about your reading of his dancing. So you write, Arthur's contortions manifest his conflicting emotions about his killings and help him comprehend his chaotic movements in the city and situate himself within it. How does dancing help Arthur comprehend chaos?
yeah. I kind of regret using those words now. Yeah, comprehend. I see it as a way um, to process chaos, and by chaos I mean like I guess maybe violence is what I mean too, like the killings. I saw the dance as a way for him to kind of work through everything that he was feeling in those moments. Like just like writing, right? Like writing is a way for us to like work through our feelings and emotions and reflections and experiences. I feel like, with that first scene, with his first killings of the three men on the subway, when he's like killing them as he's running down the subway platform and holding the gun, his body itself is just so stiff and so rigid and so like very. It seems like he's kind of trying to control himself, but still, losing it by killing them. And then he runs and finds this public bathroom, and all of a sudden you just see his body like let loose and let go, it seems, of all that tension and everything that he was feeling in that very chaotic moment, I think. And so I feel like, yeah, like it's a way for him to kind of work through and process that, I would say, trauma. I mean, even though he's the murderer, I still feel like there's a bit of traumatic experience there. um and even like with his movements and the way he's sorry, dancing, it seems very like Tai Chi, like he's moving his arms about in a really flowing way, and he's like pushing the air around him, like pushing. It seems like he's almost like pushing away the chaos or the turmoil or frustration that he's feeling in that moment. And it seems, and I just found it kind of odd because it seems so peaceful too, to have such like a peaceful moment after that really chaotic moment. Struck me. And then with the staircase dance, it's a different type of dance, and we've just seen him very brutally murder. I think that's like the most brutal one out of all the murders in the film. His ex coworker Randall, I believe. And so that scene, that murder had also had a lot of like violent energy in it. And then he goes down the staircase and he's like just letting loose again, but in a different, more aggressive way. And I feel like that's when we really see the full transformation of the Joker. He's in the full Joker costume. But I feel like that's him like claiming that space and kind of claiming Gotham too as like his own weird playground. Like, this is his space now, and he's going to do with it what he wants to. Yeah, but I definitely kind of saw it as a way to process. Yeah,
I love it. And I'm glad you used the term chaos. I loved it because to me, it seemed, I think you were right. I think you were onto something there because what I found interesting, even the first time I watched the film, was kind of the evolution of his understanding of dance to a degree. And what I mean is like, so he at one point he pretends like he's talking to the woman that he's interested in. I forgot her name. I apologize. But he he says I'm a pretty good dancer, or he says something like that, and he's just kind of dancing, but it's so controlled, and he doesn't want to take up too much space in that moment. He feels like this is where I can kind of be comfortable enough to talk to you. And then, also you have to bookend it. By the end of the film, you do see that Arthur can dance actually in a way that would totally be, seen as you are a pretty good dancer, actually, right? Like he has these moments where he's in that he looks, confident, he looks good. And then you have those middle moments, like the one you mentioned in the bathroom, that your average person might look and see as chaotic. But in reality, with every movement that he does, like you just mentioned, it's actually in some sense almost like a way to instill his order. That's this transition movement between that very stiff dancing that we had at the beginning, and then he learns how his body works, how just how much space he can take up when he wants to. And then that beautiful staircase dance that just looks, like it could have been a choreographed dance. And so you have that emergence of him. And let me ask you what you think about this. Would you say that the emergence of that kind of beautiful choreographed dance downstairs, would you go as far as to say, do you think that in some way that is the moment when Arthur feels almost reintegrated into that society? Like, I now understand my role in this
yeah,
society.
yeah. I feel like that is the scene where like I see him claiming agency. Like, yes, definitely. Like, he knows his place, his role, even though it's a destructive one. I mean, the role is kind of just disturbing, but yeah, I feel like I really like what you said too, because I feel like the movie or the dance scenes anyway, they are kind of like him coming into not just like the Joker, but his body. Like coming into owning his body and knowing how to to be in these spaces, how to be located, how to move in these spaces. So I really, yeah, like what you said there about the coming into his own, just through the body and its movements. But yeah, I definitely feel like that scene is the key scene. And also, yeah, he is a really great dancer. I mean, I can't even imagine trying to dance down a staircase. Like, he did it and he didn't fall and he did it really well. And yeah, it's kind of like suave and yeah, he was, yeah, definitely.
there is something very and of course they used it, at least I believe they did. They used parts of it, at least I think, in the teaser and in the trailer as well, because it looks very polished, very confident. He kind of starts to really take on some kind of sense of previous iterations of the Joker that we had seen, with that kind of um here I am. And to Phillips's credit too, the cinematography of it, of the wide sort of angle as it's coming down, and that when you juxtapose that against earlier in the film, when you can see he's slouched over and really struggling to get up those stairs. It's such a even if you don't feel it at the time as a viewer, it's you can't help but kind of smile at this beautiful moment of this gentleman now all of a sudden coming down and owning those those
Yeah.
staircases, you
I'm like,
know?
I'm rooting for him in a way. Yeah, I'm rooting for him. I'm like, yeah, you go. Yeah. Like, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'd like to actually, because I want to move a little bit into, maybe a little bit into that rooting area kind of here a little bit, and actually would like to do so by quoting you again, and let's talk about this. So you write in the article, Phillips's film highlights a troubling reality of the twisted nature of the crowd as they bathe in Joker's destruction rather than trying to save him from his downfall. My question might seem somewhat simple, but I don't think it is. What is preventing this mass of people at the end of the film from wanting to save and redeem Arthur Fleck? And is it too late to redeem the Joker?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I feel like, um, well, I feel like the crowd in the film, we see them, especially like in the subway scene, being really desensitized to Arthur Fleck, because they all seem to have, their own stuff going on, um, and so they're also angry. We see them protesting against people like Thomas Wayne, and so I feel like they want a little of what Arthur Fleck has. They want what we see in those last few scenes. That control and that power that he has, and so I feel like they see him, on Murray Franklin, the ultimate protest, right? Like shooting and killing Murray Franklin on live TV. And then it's after that scene, I think, where like all the chaos on the streets happen and where, he gets lifted up out of the cop car. But so I feel like, yeah, that they see that he has power and they want that power. And so I feel like that's why they don't try to stop him, because they see that he's able to like get out of his situation and his position, and that's like that's how he creates his following, I think. Um so so I feel like they kind of see that violence is a means to getting recognition and to alleviate their suffering by just like fighting back, which is kind of, I think, like you said, really complicated and daunting. Not daunting, just depressing, I would say. Because I really hope that that's not like the solution. I don't want to say that violence is the solution. But yeah, I feel like they've kind of like drunk the Kool-Aid at that point, and they've kind of lost it as well. Yeah.
Do you think at that point it's too late? Let's just keep it to the universe of the film for a minute. Do you think at that point it's too late to redeem Arthur from becoming the Joker? And we want to be we want to be careful about kind of separating the two a little bit in some sense, right? So we're like, at least I'm trying to, because I don't want to even, I want to kind of be clear about it too. Is it too late at that point to redeem Arthur, you think?
Yeah, I do. I think he's gone by that point. Yeah, I feel like he's gone when the staircase dance happens. I think it. Yeah, I definitely. I think it's too late. I feel like I'm trying to see if there's any part of me that thinks that they could save him, but I really don't. I feel like he's made his decision, and that transformation is so secure. And so, yeah, I don't think that there's any going back or saving him.
Yeah, there's that
Mm-mm.
added difficulty too of the fact that they make him at that point they make him a symbol, right? As they're carrying him away. So I hadn't thought about this before until just this second. So he starts off the film kind of as an avatar of mental health problems, right? That's trying to figure out, no, 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 I'm more than that. I'm a human. I have all of these complexities like everyone else, and I'm trying to live a good life like everyone else. And then he has the staircase moment and everything that happens in between. And at the end, when he gets carried away, in reality, it's almost as if maybe he doesn't recognize this. He's sort of become an avatar again, in some sense, or a symbol again, right? So is it possible that he's not redeemable because, in some sense, he's lost at that point actually agency, whether he sees it or not?
Yeah, yeah, like his identity is being controlled by the crowd in a way. Like they control his narrative. Like they've kind of like taken over. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so definitely. Yeah, I definitely think that's what's happened. I was gonna say something else of what you just said, reminding me of something else. But yeah, he's never like we I feel like we never really do see Arthur Fleck sometimes throughout the film. Like he's first the symbol of the disenfranchised, the oppressed, the marginalized, and then at the end, yeah, he's kind of like a symbol of the protest to that, or the revolt to that, or the rebellion. Yeah, so he never does receive any kind of agency, which I think is really sad. And so in that way, he's kind of a tragic figure. But yeah, I definitely I don't think there's any. I mean, also because he doesn't seem to want to be changed. I mean, by that point, he's getting recognition, right? Like he has attention. Granted, I think it's like I don't know if it's an attention that you would necessarily want to have, but he has it. You know, he's gotten it. So I feel like yeah, there's no going back for him. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty horrifying, but it does kind of show that even in trying to even in reclaiming your agency, you can kind of lose it in both ways, then kind of both directions, which is something that again I had not thought of before until we just had this conversation. How, in some sense, because my original reaction to the film, I don't know about you, but my original reaction was, of course, that he's regained his agency completely, and this is who he wants to be now, and that could still be the more correct reading in some sense. But I do think there is something to be said about him once again being sort of reduced to a symbolic figure. And once you become a symbolic figure, especially for something that is so such an energy oriented movement, right? Like there's a lot of energy in that crowd. It's very difficult to fight back against that tide and to push back and to say, well, no, 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 actually, we're going too far. Let's pull back and let's rethink, all of this. He's knocked out for one thing, so he can't object. And then by the end, he's also sort of he's in the car, he sees it, and he's like many people become intoxicated
Yeah,
by that kind of energy.
definitely. Yeah. But he's I mean, definitely, yeah, like you said, not really in control. It's a mask. Like we think he might be in control, but he's not. It seems like the crowd is kind of and that I feel like that's really symbolized too with like the way they pull him out of the car and then lift him on top of it. Like they are controlling where he's moving at that point um, in the street. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. And now I want to go back and change my article and put that in there. Yeah, because he doesn't really change. I mean, he doesn't really gain agency, does he? Yeah, that's a really good point.
Well, no, these are
Yeah,
just discussion points. I can't tell you how many
yeah,
times, as soon as you hit submit on those articles and they go in, there's always something where you're like, oh, why didn't I?
yeah,
That kind of a thing. But that's okay. They're great for these,
yeah,
conversations.
yeah,
Something else too. We've been talking a lot about class structure and we talked about Thomas Wayne, and you mentioned Murray as well. And recently, I've actually been having this conversation has been coming up on the show. This idea of father figures and young men and that kind of connection, and that's perhaps, for me at least, I thought it was in some ways the saddest part was just how much Arthur was looking for a father figure to simply tell him, "I'm proud of you. I'm proud that you exist," which is a really fascinating kind of, I mean, lowest level of kind of pride that he's looking for. That, can somebody please acknowledge that I exist? That's what I really want. And yes, Thomas Wayne is very much separated out in the film, at least by the money that he has, the resources that he has. He's set it up in a way that you have that distance between himself and everyone else, right? Even just the scene where he visits the house, there's that tremendous distance between the gate and even the house and all of that. And it made me think about the idea of, it's not even so much necessarily the money that's kind of corrupting Wayne from being a good person. It's how he thinks about it, how he's using it as space in some way, as trying to avoid connecting with other places as well. And I found it interesting. I do wonder if, in some sense, because there were a lot of mixed reviews in the film or on the film, in terms of seeing it as um, a gritty, honest depiction of problems that we have in supporting people, in general, with or without mental health concerns, just in general. But then there was also the people who were very much concerned about this kind of rallying cry for violence, for pushing back. And of course, we certainly shouldn't be happy that Wayne and Murray are murdered, but we have to look at it in some way as, so what led to this? And so I'm curious about, if you how did you see, let's start with maybe just the connection between Murray and Arthur. How did you see that kind of relationship in the film?
Yeah, it does kind of a little bit mirror or remind me of, like, it's another man that Arthur Fleck kind of idolizes, puts on a pedestal, and yeah, like mimics that father son relationship a little bit. I see that relationship as very imagined in Arthur Fleck's mind, just kind of like a, not a fairy tale, but just like a dream. He's always kind of like dreaming of being on the show. But yeah, I feel like he does kind of see him as this, if not paternal, then maybe role model or mentor type figure, even though they've never really met until like the end of the film. Um, yeah, and then to have that figure on public television, just yeah, I don't know, like diminish you and bring you down and make fun of you and make you a laugh on public television. I think that probably, yeah, really did set him off, and he just had to kill and silence that voice. Yeah, and I do feel like, you know if Arthur Fleck not just had a father figure, but like a hero, he had no one, no, like no hero. I think of that first scene, yeah, where the kids steal a sign and he's getting beaten up in an alley, and you're like, where's Batman? Or like, where's the hero here? Like, who's gonna save him? And no one, yeah, because he's invisible, I guess, no one sees him, no one tries to save him. So yeah, I definitely think that there is that lack of, I think he would have possibly turned out differently if he did have that father figure,
It's
for
very
sure.
much this kind of a kind of, even though Arthur's mother plays a huge role in the film, she's very prominent. She's also depicted by Phillips as very passive in some sense, right? Like, she's waiting, like, for that hero, like you said. She's waiting for Thomas Wayne, waiting. And the whole time that she's waiting, her life is going more and more into ruin. And in some sense, her waiting for that male figure as well becomes also the downfall of her relationship with Arthur. It makes it more difficult, right? And again, this idea, this is why I love these conversations, because I hadn't thought about this even too much before too. I'd have to go back and watch the ending again, but in that whole crowd, I don't remember seeing a single woman, a single female in that crowd. It's just all men. And is that in some sense, you have the young men at the very beginning who take his sign and beat him up, and they're clearly young. They're clearly young men beating up an older man, showing that sort of lack of respect for an older father figure. And then here's Arthur, who is supposed to be the individual who is mentally unstable, and yet in some sense he's the one who's trying to do the thing that has been done for thousands of years, which is to say, make those connections. I want to make a connection with a father figure and have that sense of calmness, that someone believes in me, someone loves me, knows that I exist. And so I'm not even sure if there's necessarily a question at the end of this, because now my mind just keeps going, and I apologize for that. But I just find it fascinating that throughout this whole film, that paternal figure, just how important it is, and how if you don't take that seriously, how destructive it can kind of be and become.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it'd be fascinating to see a paper on that if you you want to write that paper. Yeah,
Maybe next semester.
yeah, yeah,
Can I ask you
definitely.
can I ask you to
Mhm.
comment then on the sort of the negative side of that, the negative space? But
The next,
what I mean is the female side of this, the
oh
role of the
yeah,
woman in the film, then where
yeah.
where is that in Phillips's film?
Well, I guess in that way, it would seem like a bit of a sexist or misogynistic portrayal, right? I mean, if he's portraying the mother figure as the kind of, she is kind of blamed. I mean, she's blamed a bit for Fleck's downfall. Yeah, waiting on the hero, waiting for her being so kind of patriarchal, or not patriarchal, but just kind of like traditional in the sense that she's waiting on like Prince Charming or someone to come save her, and in the meantime isn't doing anything to help her son or herself out of their situation. Yeah, I feel like there's some blame there. Um, and so that is a little bit, it is kind of disturbing to think about that, and how there are no women in the crowd at the end. Yeah, I don't, I need to think on that a little bit more, but yeah, it is. I feel like that's kind of I don't know, slight a little bit. I feel like it's a bit of an unfair portrayal too, to kind of I mean, at the same time, I do think she should have, like, done something. But who knows what other odds were also stacked against her at the time. Um, so yeah, it is an interesting way to do that, to portray that.
Yeah,
Um,
because there doesn't seem to be, at least looking back on it, there doesn't seem to be as much of a setup for our feeling sorry for his mother, now that I think about it,
no,
which is kind of odd, and I hadn't thought about that before. We of course focus in on Arthur, but there is something to be said for that.
yeah, I think that the mother is also suffering from mental illness. I believe she had some kind of psychological disorder, right? I think so. Like when he finds the papers in the film, he goes to the hospital and he finds the paperwork, and that's when he realizes that she had like chained him to like a heater or something, and like I think he had been like sexually molested by some of her boyfriends that had come in. Really crazy stuff. Which I feel like she also had a history of mental illness as well. So then, I mean, how can you? I don't know. Like how can you blame like a mentally ill mother? I mean, I don't. That's just a whole complicated
It is. It's
situation too.
much more complicated, of course, than we have time to to sort of unpack here. It's just it certainly is, though, kind of a horrific vision, that you have these parental structures that are so broken down. One that has been completely broken down in the mother, who is, I guess, in some sense, she's both detached and not.
Yeah. Then you have people like Spider-Man. I know maybe I'm getting a little off topic here.
Go
Who
for it.
doesn't have, I mean, he has, okay, maybe that's it. He has parental figures, but like he wasn't raised, by his parents, right? So like I feel like it's kind of stigmatizing too by saying that if you don't have the parental figures, then you're going to grow up and like be a troubled person. I feel like there are people that don't have parental figures, maybe not biological, maybe there just have to be some kind of, yeah, like some kind of role model or something. But I mean, I feel like there are some that still, kind of overcome that. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was just
Absolutely.
going off. Yeah.
Even no, no, you're right. Even in the film itself, it tries to extend itself out to someone like Murray, right? And then also Randall, believe it or not, he's trying to sort of take on that role when he gives him the gun. But again, it's this idea of, because you're right, you don't necessarily need um, parental figures to become a perfectly wonderful, citizen, and grow up well. But it does seem to say that you do need people along the way who can provide a kind of acknowledgement that you exist, acknowledgement that you're loved, and acknowledgement that what you do matters and how you do it matters as well, right? So Randall's giving him of the gun, that's certainly was the bad choice, that came back to bite him in almost a Greek tragedy fashion in some sense. But it's actually what I'm taking away from this exchange that we're having in this part is just how the film is a lot more complex than I even thought in this sense. I mean, it really is. You could have an hour-long conversation just about those kind of um, parental slash mentor, maybe a better word here too, mentor figures, and whether or not, in some sense, Phillips is saying we need to think more about our interactions with others and providing a kind of mentor relationship to young people, which I that much I do know, I think we do need today quite a
Yeah,
bit.
definitely. And just more visibility, I think, like you said, too, for people with mental illness, disabilities. Yeah, more recognition. Because I mean, I think with recognition, with visibility comes that support, right? If they're not even seen, then they're not going to get that, like we see in the film. Yeah.
So we'll start to bring this to a close a little bit, because we
Yeah.
got pretty deep into the woods
Yeah.
here, and I liked it. It was good.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, so you watched the film first, then you wrote about it and you organized your thoughts and you wrote this fantastic article. What do you walk away having learned from either the film and also your process of writing on the film? What do you walk away from with the Joker?
Um, I walked away with thinking about why I'm so drawn to him and fascinated with him. And then that just like a series of questions after that. I walked away with like why are we or am I so drawn to violence, so drawn to these kinds of characters, and then I also thought about like how I wanted us, like I wrote it because I wanted the audience to think more about how we see these characters, how they are visualized in our culture and our media, and how we react to those representations. Um, I wanted us to think more deeply about how people like Arthur Fleck are ostracized and stigmatized by society. But really, like from our conversation that we've had just now, I think just thinking more about the visibility, how these people are and characters are seen, and how we treat our viewing of them, um, are things that I wanted to wanted people to walk away with it. There are things that I walked away with too from the article. Like why do I see him, Arthur Fleck, as this kind of destructive fallen figure that there's no hope for anymore? Because maybe there is actually hope, you know. But I don't think so. But like, so yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's wonderfully stated as well. And I think that's a
Yeah.
great place for us to kind of draw this to a close. Liz, thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah.
show and sharing this information with the audience. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Joseph. Yeah. Great.
The Joker is truly a difficult film to pin down. Like the character himself, I suppose. I can't help but walk away feeling conflicted about where I stand on the film. However, that is what great art does. It makes us feel, makes us uncomfortable, prompts us to reconsider what it means to be human. Todd Phillips' film certainly does that. Should we feel sympathy for Arthur? I would say yes. Should we feel sympathy for the Joker? That's a more difficult question. I'll leave that one for you to work through. And don't be afraid to let me know what your answer is in the comments section. Until next time, try to keep one foot firmly planted on neutral ground. And have a great day. And dance. No matter how you do it, dance. Just enjoy the movement.